Hey everyone, it's James. Welcome back to the Phase podcast. Today we're going to be talking about a topic lots of you will be thinking about as we head into the summer holidays, and that is supporting children with secondary school transition. I recently delivered some sessions on this topic at all three Hitchin secondary schools. If you attended one of those sessions, you may want to skip through to near the end of this podcast, as for the first part of the episode, I'll be covering similar stuff as what I spoke about in those sessions. I made a note of the most common questions parents asked in the time I spent with them. To wrap up this podcast, Molly and Kieran will join me to hopefully help provide some answers, advice, or signpost you to find help. It's important to say I've attached a link to the resources discussed on today's podcast in the episode description. You may find it helpful to have this to hand as you listen. But without further ado, I hope you enjoy the Phase Step Up podcast. I'm going to cover some helpful ideas, tools, and resources that come under four main areas. These are rapport, resilience, readiness, and reconnect. Let's start with rapport. Rapport may seem like a strange word. For many of us, the first thing we think of when we hear the word is a police officer trying to build rapport with someone they're interrogating as part of a criminal investigation. Don't worry, I'm not going to be encouraging you to interrogate your child. Rapport actually means a close and harmonious relationship in which the people or groups concerned understand each other's feelings or ideas and communicate well. Maintaining a harmonious relationship with a child who's going through a big change isn't always easy. Not least when moving to secondary school isn't the only change your child will encounter in the near future. Puberty is also on the horizon, and anyone who's watched Inside Out 2 will know just how many changes go on inside a child's brain as they hit puberty.
Orange? Who made the console orange? Hello, everybody! Ah! I'm anxiety. We're Riley's new emotions. I'm envy. That's ennui. On what? That's embarrassment.
If you're listening to this podcast, you're likely to be someone who wants to be able to support their child as best as possible. Being aware of a few simple skills for having better conversations and building rapport will be fundamentally important in this regard. It's much easier to support someone when you've got a harmonious relationship and you're able to understand each other's feelings. Small questions are something you might want to try starting conversations with. In order to explain what a small question is, first I'll give you an example of a big question. How are you? We all ask that question all the time, but it's such a big question, usually too big to answer in any great detail. Therefore, it often elicits a small response. Most of us probably have a default response for that question. All right, not too bad, good, fine.
Hello, how are you?
I'm okay.
Hello there, how do you do?
Fine.
Small questions, on the other hand, are much more specific. For example, what is one thing you learnt today? Who did you enjoy spending time with today? What did you have for lunch today? These kind of questions not only communicate real interest, but it's impossible to respond to them with small, generic answers. If you want to find out more about how your child's day went as they begin secondary school in September, small questions might be a great way into those conversations. And just to tag another tip onto small questions, being intentional about remembering stuff that comes up in conversation could be super helpful. In the busyness of life, it can be easy for all of us to forget a conversation we had 2 hours ago, let alone last week. On the other hand, hopefully we can all relate to how good it feels when someone asks us about something, an event, challenge, celebration, or anything we had previously told them about. It communicates to us that they were listening to what we had to say in that prior conversation, and they care. It gives us an invitation to share about something that we're passionate about as well. By making sure you remember things that matter to your child, perhaps by keeping a notes page on your phone or even a physical notebook, you'll give yourself more opportunities to show them that you care about what they have to say and want to know more as well. You want to continue the conversation. The final thing I wanted to mention about rapport is movement. As your child hits puberty, the way they feel about eye contact is likely to change. Going for a walk side by side creates space to talk without the added pressure of having to constantly look each other in the face. Going outside to have conversations can also be helpful as it creates a separate environment. Sometimes if you talk about difficult stuff at home, it can make home feel really tense. Have you ever walked into a room and just been able to tell that there's been an argument even though no one said anything? Neuroception is our nervous system's ability to subconsciously detect the level of safety in any given environment. You might call neuroception our vibe detector. Going for a walk to talk about difficult stuff might help ensure that home isn't constantly setting off you and your child's bad vibe alarm. Movement changes emotion, and by going for a walkie-talkie, you might call it, you're already doing something that is a positive outlet for emotions before the conversation has even started. If you're interested in some further reading on rapport, I'd recommend checking out Gary Chapman's The 5 Love Languages of Teenagers and Rapport by Emily and Lawrence Allison. The second area I wanted to consider in this episode is resilience. For many children, moving to secondary school is not only a big change, but also a considerable challenge. Resilience is what will enable them to adapt, overcome, and grow. At Phase, we work with hundreds of Year 6 students each year, and the most common concerns we hear about secondary school are getting lost, making new friends, increased homework, and consequences or detention. I want to mention a few practical resources that may help build resilience in the face of these challenges. When it comes to getting lost, simply tracing the school map together is one way to try and make the new school seem more familiar from home. Doing this might be a good time to reassure your child that there will be people that they can ask for directions. In most lessons, they'll be with their tutor group and so will be able to walk together with their peers. Also, you might want to remind them that in the very first few weeks, most teachers will be understanding of the fact that they are still learning their way around. Tracing a school map may not be the best way of knowing exactly where each room is, but it should help your child become more aware of where different departments are in relation to each other. Some children will be incredibly excited about going to a bigger school with lots more people and having opportunities to make new friends. Others will find this prospect daunting. It's natural that our personalities vary in terms of how introverted or extroverted, shy or confident we are. Support circles is a great resource that may help encourage children if they are apprehensive about being around lots of new people. It's simply a way to visualize with your child what communities they belong to, who they feel close to, i.e., who they have similar interests as or who they enjoy spending time with, and who their core people are, i.e., who would they go to for support if they had a problem, perhaps even who do they feel comfortable crying in front of. Going into year 7, it may be encouraging for your child to be reminded that they are surrounded by support. What's more, they'll be able to add new people to their support circles as they head to their new school. And staying on the theme of circles, control circles is another resource that can be particularly good at building resilient thinking in times of change. Control circles is a tool that gives your child a chance to reflect on what they can and can't control in a given situation, as well as some of the things they have influence over, but not complete control. To give you a picture of what it looks like, there are 3 concentric circles: the circle of control, the circle of influence, and the circle of concern. It's a tool that was popularized in Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's designed to help people focus their energy on what they can change, what they can control. Completing this worksheet with your child could help you explain to them that it's important to let go of some of the things they cannot control. For example, the size of the school, who their teachers are, what lessons they have that day, getting homework, or the school rules. They can't change any of these things. Meanwhile, hopefully you will have a chance to help your child feel a sense of autonomy by realizing all the things that are in their control. For example, even if they can't control the rules, they can control their attitude. And they may not be able to control who their teachers are or who's in their class, but they can control being kind and respectful. Children can't control how much homework they get, but they can control whether they make an effort to stay organized. If this resource clicks with your child, it could provide them a short list of important things to focus on, instead of worrying about the endless list of concerns they have about their upcoming change. Perhaps the most powerful tools you may want to try out when your child is facing a challenge are breathing and grounding techniques. Focusing on our breath engages the logical part of our brain and gets us out of the fight, flight, freeze response. Slowing down and taking a breath often helps us turn down the dial on our emotions from extreme to manageable and recognizable. Furthermore, noticing senses in our body draws our attention away from difficult emotions. On numerous occasions, I've seen just how impactful breathing techniques can be. Recently, an incident occurred while I was in a secondary school. A member of staff asked me to go and speak to a young person I knew. They were visibly upset by something that had happened. Understandably, their emotions were high and they were finding it tough to communicate what had happened. Instead of throwing a barrage of questions their way, I said, let's take a breath. I put my left hand in the air and put the index finger of my right hand at the base of my left thumb, knowing that this young person had practiced hand breathing with me in the past when they were my mentee. After taking 5 deep breaths in and out while tracing our hands, this young person was calm enough to talk to me about what had happened. We went and played basketball together to talk, and by the end of the afternoon, the incident was well on its way to being resolved. You might have experienced similar incidents with your child. Perhaps they've been on their way to something they're anxious about, or they've come home and they're upset about something. Having some go-to breathing and grounding techniques will likely make a world of difference in those scenarios where difficult emotions are high. It could be hand breathing, like I just mentioned, or shape breathing, or the 5 senses game. Explanations to all of these techniques are linked in the description to this episode. My final tip on resilience is to find a way to practice positive emotions. My favourite way to do this is gratitude journaling. It's something that's really simple for you to give a go with your child if you're interested. Why is this important for building resilience in the face of challenges? Well, our brains evolved to be unbelievably good at looking out for danger, threats, and bad stuff. Their ability to do this keeps us safe. Sometimes, however, our brain goes too far and it feels like every thought is tainted by anxiety, sadness, or fear. Each of us has a filter in our brain. Our reticular activation system helps us to subconsciously decide what to focus on. One humorous example of this you may have noticed in the past is when you've bought a new car or a new pair of shoes. You probably feel like you see other people with that car or those shoes more regularly. That is your brain's reticular activation system at work. Your brain has decided for you that that particular car and those specific shoes are important. Right now, your child's brain has probably decided for them that secondary school is something they should focus on. Rightly so. On the other hand, this becomes unhelpful if they are constantly contemplating all the challenges and worries they have about secondary school. Research has shown that tools like gratitude journaling start to literally retrain and rewire our brain's filter, our reticular activation system, to look out for good stuff more easily. When we do this, we start to feel far more positive emotionally. We all know that facing challenges with a more positive mindset is beneficial. Gratitude journaling involves simply encouraging your child to write down 3 different things they're grateful for every day. It's super important that these 3 things are different each day. Most children will find it easy to think of 3 things they're grateful for in the first couple of days. It might be food, family, home, friends, pets, games, sports, YouTube, any of the above. After a few days though, your child will have to think of smaller, more specific things that they may not have noticed before. I like to compare this to going to the gym. Someone who's never been before may be able to lift heavier weights each time they go for the first few weeks, as there's so much room for growth. After a while, however, the weights become heavier and progress becomes more marginal. In the same way, we see our brain's reticular activation system being retrained to see the world through a more positive lens when we keep a gratitude journal over a sustained period of time. Our brain's filter grows stronger and more able to notice and magnify small moments of joy with consistent practice. Keeping a gratitude journal with your child is something that may help them feel more positive in the face of their upcoming change. Let's think about readiness. What are some simple things to do over summer that might help your child feel more ready for the new environment and new responsibilities they will have in Year 7? One opportunity to build your child's ability to take responsibility is to give them some ownership over making sure they have everything they need for September. You could create a list of uniform, equipment, and stationery and make it their responsibility to check stuff off as you get it and to remind you of what they still need. Once they've got everything they need, it may be useful to remind them to pack their bag and charge their Chromebook the night before school in September. However, as time goes by, encouraging your child to find ways to remember themselves to do these things might be another simple way to stretch their responsibility. If you're worried about their time management skills and ability to stay organized, there are some daily or weekly planners on the Phase website you may want to download and give them to practice over the summer. This will also help them take responsibility for giving their free time some structure. Whether your child is walking, cycling, getting the bus, or getting a lift, their journey to school is something there should be a chance to practice over the summer. On the first day in September, there will be lots of novelty all in one go. For some children, this may be overwhelming and cause a lot of anxiety. At least being familiar with the journey to school and knowing roughly how long it takes will mean that that first day begins with something safe and familiar. Last but not least, it may be possible over the summer to help your child get used to some of the new environments they'll find themselves in at their new school. Imagine a secondary school canteen. Around 1,000 young people are being fed in under an hour. And for a new Year 7 student, the idea of selecting and paying for their lunch amidst the chaos of being surrounded by what appear to be 7 foot tall Year 11 students may be a little scary. If you have the time, taking your child to a cafe over the summer and asking them to choose and pay for their own food might help make them feel more comfortable in this new context. And another new place and space will be the secondary school library. Seeing if your child wants to go to the public library is another way you may be able to help them feel used to a new environment over the summer. Choosing and borrowing books for themselves, being polite and quiet, and treating the place with respect. The final topic for today's episode, before we move on to the Q&A section, is reconnect. Many of you will know that children's use of smartphones and social media is a controversial topic. And whether your child has a smartphone yet and whatever their new school's policies are around devices, it's important for all of us to reflect on how we make our use of technology benefit our lives rather than become a burden. As an adult, I'll admit to finding it difficult to balance my use of social media and to feel in control of how often I check my phone. How can we model balanced and healthy use of technology to children? One thing to try out at home could be phone-free meal times. For most of human history, food has provided us time to connect with one another. Putting phones on silent and in another room while eating dinner will go a long way to ensuring this crucial moment in the day isn't lost to staring at screens. During the rapport section of this podcast, I encourage going for walks. And while spending time outside together, it can be super impactful to be intentional about not checking devices. Agreeing to keep phones in pockets or bags while being out in nature is another way you might be able to model balance around devices. In my opinion, the most important concern around children and technology is impact on sleep. Sleep scientist Matthew Walker famously said, "Sleep is our superpower." How children interact with their devices at nighttime can hugely disturb their ability to access this superpower. First, being on devices right before bed is something to try and avoid. The blue light that phones, TVs, and tablets emit disrupt our body's natural rhythms. Melatonin is a hormone that regulates our sleep-wake cycle. And being exposed to blue light late at night communicates to our hormonal system that it is still daytime, making it much harder for us to get good quality sleep. Perhaps encourage reading a book or listening to music or a podcast without looking at screens for the last hour before bed. Secondly, in his recent bestseller, The Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt discusses research that shows many children regularly check their phones in the middle of the night. This is massively disruptive to sleep. Phones and many of the apps on them have a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. I'll say that again. A variable ratio reinforcement schedule. That is really hard to say. This is designed to be addictive. This creates a pull in our brains and is why so many of us check our devices so often. As you can imagine, having a potentially addictive object right next to you as you sleep isn't ideal. One way you could navigate this challenge is by getting hold of a charging dock to put downstairs. As a family, you might agree that phones stay downstairs to charge overnight. Thirdly, we take in so much information when we scroll on our devices, be it good or bad. Exposing our brain to so much mental and emotional stimulus right before trying to switch off and sleep is something to avoid. Again, helping your child to find more chill, cerebral activities in the evening will be massively beneficial for them to make the most of one of their superpowers, sleep. Before we head to the Q&A section, I just want to reiterate that everything I've covered so far in this episode is aimed as a suggestion. Please don't feel like you have to try everything out or that you've failed if something doesn't work for your child. Take what is helpful for you and leave behind the rest. I also want to acknowledge again that any conversation around smartphones is likely to be particularly challenging because of the way these devices and the apps on them work. Don't be discouraged if this area already feels like a battle for you. Hopefully, some of the simple suggestions previously mentioned will help you to help your child have a more balanced relationship with their devices. We've come to the Q&A section of today's episode. So Molly and Kieran have joined me. Why don't you both say hi to today's listeners?
Hello.
Hey everyone.
So we're going to aim to cover lots of the most commonly asked questions that parents of children that are transitioning up to secondary school asked. Now, there were so many questions that I have tried to sort of summarize the questions into major topics. So we're going to start with questions around managing emotion. So my first question for you, Kieran, is what might help manage extreme emotions? For example, if a child is too anxious to go to school, or perhaps they're struggling with anger and they're lashing out, what might help with emotions in those scenarios, or particularly also managing emotions over the summer holidays?
Yeah, great question, James. And I think one that many parents, and even as a parent myself, think about a lot. I think my first thing is, it's a bit like the aeroplane, like put your oxygen mask on first, is trying to keep, as the adult, try and be the adult in that situation. So not like fight fire with fire, but just try and keep yourself calm. It is one of the best things. We often say about movement changes emotion. So even if your child is getting really emotional in the front room, try and move to a different space, talk to them. Sometimes even sort of trying to go off topic. The very first thing we want to do is just try almost take the energy and the power out of that moment, so that you can get to a place where you can help them to logically think. Some of the ways to get the power out of that moment are breathing. Even getting them to eat something. So when we eat something or drink something, our rest and digest system kicks in over that sort of fight or flight. Doing some things like that. Once they're calm, there's a whole range of other things we can do. But the key bit is trying to remove the power of that emotion instantly. As I say, breathing is really good. Once they are calm, it can be just trying to find out actually what was the trigger, what was the cause, and not in a police officer investigation style, where were you on Tuesday at 12 p.m. But in that sense of, the other morning when that happened, I noticed that X, Y, and Z, do you know why? And trying to have soft, calm, curious sort of tones around it. A really tough thing for a parent is the fact that those 11-year-olds, as they're moving up to secondary school, are going through huge brain transition. Huge amounts of stuff is happening upstairs in their head, even though it might not always seem like it. And so actually manage your emotions becomes a lot trickier and a lot more difficult for them. And so as parents, as adults, we've got to have a bit more grace for them. The thing that I often try to remember, and don't always remember it in those moments, is that a young person or a child can only emotionally respond as mature as their brain is. And so I'm older than my children, so I expect them to respond like me, but they don't. And so again, in those good moments when I remember that helps me to stay calmer. And if I'm a bit calmer, that can help the situation be a bit calmer.
So I think lots around sort of having that grace, that understanding, staying calm yourself, and finding ways where in those really extreme situations or the heat of the moment, you might be able to take their attention away, calm them down. Maybe that's through talking about something different, changing the subject. Maybe it's a breathing or grounding exercise, those kind of things. But staying calm yourself seems to be the big lesson from
Yeah, a big one. But recognizing that often these moments are happening in the real tight time pressures. heading out the door for work. So already everybody's emotions are a little bit higher. And they say it might be difficult in those moments, but if we're aware that's going to be a pinch point, how can we as adults sort of be a bit more prepared for that, a bit calmer? What might be leading up to it that we can just ease the pressure for that? So if your young person is worried about going to school, actually, how do we have a slightly slower morning? Might mean we have to get up earlier and sort of just take a bit more time to get there. Over that, nobody generally makes a good response when they're pressured, adults or young people.
So something around as well, just creating space, almost creating time for yourself, whether that's getting up earlier or just allowing a little bit extra time. So not everything is done in a rush, because often rush can just make our emotions seem more extreme in the first place when we're rushing around. And
Yeah. I mean, it's completely different, but that's how scammers work. They put you in a place where they're rushing you so that you don't logically think. I mean, that second part about what to do in the holidays, I think a key bit or a helpful bit can be almost setting out a bit of a timetable, putting something up on the fridge, say, look, this is what's going on. You're at grandma's on Monday, you got holiday club on Tuesday, you've got cinema on Wednesday, whatever it might be, but you've got key moments so that the young person is just aware of what's coming up, what's going on. And there might be some days where it's like, we've got to leave early that day, so we need to be up. So already where you're going to have those pinch point moments, you're preparing them.
the next sort of set of questions that I summarized are around building resilience, but also building skills as children get older and go to secondary school. So, Molly, what do you think might help build resilience and also maybe some of that time management and independence and being able to take responsibility?
Yeah, there's a big jump up to secondary school in terms of responsibilities that your children, young people have, what they almost are expected to do themselves, which maybe at primary school might have been a bit more of a collective responsibility. Actually moving into this place of individual responsibility and personal responsibility in a different way. And independence sounds really great, but I think sometimes we're a little bit scared of it. And I think especially as parents, sometimes it requires us to let go a little bit of some of those things. So I think my first kind of tip around it would be, don't do all of the organising for them. Actually allow them the space to figure some things out. And that's how we build our resilience, sometimes by getting things a little bit wrong and deciding, actually tomorrow I'm going to do this differently because it didn't quite work today. So trying not to do all of that organising for them, not packing their bag for them, getting them to pack their own bag. And also around building habits early on, especially when considering things around time management, but being independent and making sure they've got everything. Building habits. Where are they going to charge their Chromebook every night? Where are they going to keep their books? And like setting those things up like early on in September. So actually that just builds a routine, builds habits, so that so that they know kind of how things are going to work. So I think, building resilience can be tough. It requires us to get things wrong. I don't think we build resilience if we don't get anything wrong. Doing things perfectly is great in the moment, but actually we need to learn to manage some of those things when they don't quite go to plan, or things that might be new that crop up. I think my third kind of tip with it would be, do some trips together, like have some things to be excited about. Maybe practice your walk to school, go get a haircut at the end of August, buy a new pencil case, whatever else it might be, go to do your uniform shop, all of those things, kind of giving them a little bit of independence, maybe getting them to hand the money over at the till like they will in the school canteen when they start in September. Just those little small bits of independence will help just build some of that confidence in them, some of those skills, and then ultimately that resilience.
Nice. So one of the big things I took from that is almost creating an environment where it's okay to get things wrong. I think that's one of the
Yeah,
best ways
definitely.
to build resilience, but also some of that progressive overload. So if you want your child to take responsibility and gain some of those time management skills, actually some of that is just letting go and passing those responsibilities over to them. That might not all be in one go,
Yeah.
because obviously we don't grow responsibility overnight, but it might just be progressively doing that little by little.
Yeah, one thing at a time. And they'll have gained a whole bunch of responsibility at school. And obviously, you're not going to be at their school with them. So there'll be responsibilities like getting to the right room, asking the right people, actually going and getting their lunch. All of those things will be their own responsibilities. So they'll be practicing it at school as well. So we'll be used to kind of building up on that. So actually trying to do that slowly at home as well can be really helpful.
My next question is all around settling in. A few parents ask things about making friends in the first couple of weeks, what might help children just cope with the first few weeks in September better. And I've phrased this question, what might help my child settle in quickly? Now, I'm aware that that might not be the best way to word that question, actually, because sometimes time is actually a really important part of that. So actually, if your expectation is that your child is going to be 10 out of 10 loving secondary school in the first week, actually maybe it's that expectation needs to change slightly, because sometimes time is actually just over time we adapt to changes. But in that question, Kieran, what might really help in the first couple of weeks in particular, make those first couple of weeks a bit more easy, a bit more manageable?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and that word quickly is an interesting one. I think first of all, taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture, um, it may be for many young people as they step up to secondary school that the first week or so is brilliant. Like it's new, it's different. They're excited. Um, they're not really doing too much work as they're just getting into their lessons and all of this sort of stuff. Even the first few days are quite different. There's not everybody is back in school. In secondary schools, often they bring in year 7, 11, and 12, and then they bring in year 13, and it's just a lot of chopping and changing. So perhaps the first sort of week and a half might be really quite good, and you're like, oh, this is brilliant. And then reality hits. It's like the honeymoon period's over, and then things might begin to drop as uh, work really begins. There's a lot of change. There's a huge amount of change that happens for them as they go to secondary school. From going from having one classroom to now having 13 different classrooms, and 16 different teachers and etc. And so all these different changes can mean that it's a lot for them to cope with. Adding on to the fact that that first term, the autumn term, is the longest one. It's over a third of the year, and so as they go through that term, they get really tired. They're doing a lot more movement, carrying a lot more stuff. So to help them settle in quickly or quicker, a few things I'd really encourage people to do is find out what lunchtime activities are on at school. It's a great way for them to learn a bunch of things. First of all, meet a whole bunch of people that are going to these different clubs, to experience some new things that maybe they've not done before. It's a fantastic way to learn where things are in school and around school. And a bit like the idea of resilience, of trying things and it not always going well, they can try some stuff that maybe they think, okay, that didn't quite go well. Turns out I'm not so great at chess or climbing or whatever that might be. But they've taken on some challenges. They've met some new people. It also helps them to expand their potential friendship network beyond their tutor group, or who they sit next to in English. They're starting to meet a variety of people, which can really, really help. The other thing is just to help them settle in quickly, much like Molly said around them packing their bags, actually helping them gain that independence in all of that. Keep a copy of their timetable where you can see it, just so you can keep a watchful eye on them. And then maybe even, if possible, if it works for you, maybe seeing about inviting some friends around after school could be a good way of them just beginning to build those new friendships.
Something that answer reminded me of was that so often action is like the cure for anxiety. So you said about getting involved in lots of stuff and trying out different clubs. And I think particularly if your child is anxious about secondary school, it might be difficult to convince them that joining loads of clubs is going to be something that they're really keen to do. But actually, I think if they do then try that and take loads of action, get really involved in secondary school, actually that action will probably so often be the cure for their worries about secondary school. And they'll suddenly feel like they're a real part of their new environment, their new place.
Absolutely, and just remind me, it's not about sort of joining them once you've gone. Once you have to go every time. It's experiencing those to then maybe decide what are the 2 or 3 I want to do, because it gives. So for some young people to have something to focus on in lunchtime can be really helpful. Others they find the balance of having something structured and unstructured throughout the week. So maybe a couple of days of lunch clubs, a couple of days of just playing football with friends, or sitting down talking, or doing different things. But yeah, just I think that's a great phrase. Action is the first step of curing anxiety.
Molly, do you have anything else to add on tips for the first couple of weeks and settling in?
Yeah, I was just thinking about when you talk about all the different changes around like teachers and like everything is different. Like everything for a young person is different. Actually, home and you are probably the only things that are going to be the same. Um, so I think having some like familiar favorites at home in those big times of change, like favorite dinner, favorite TV show, just some of those like things in the week that are familiar. Because I've often found just personally when I've gone through changes, I like to have some of those familiar things, even if it's like when you move to a new house, having something from your old house that you really like. It's a little bit like that. So finding those familiar favourites in those time of change that you can kind of bring in that are consistent amongst everything else being different.
So yeah, finding your familiar things in the midst of change, and that might even be just a favorite dinner. That's a really good tip, Molly. Thank you. Next, I just wanted us to think about if a child is facing challenges at secondary school, sort of what happens next. What can they go and do within school to find support or find help?
Yeah, definitely. There will be a whole bunch of challenges that come with secondary school. Challenges come with change. I don't think you can have change without challenges because things are different and we have to learn to cope with things in a different way. But be assured that there are lots of people in the school who are there to look out for your child. They're just navigating a new place. Now, in the induction week, in transition, they will be aware of lots of these people and who these people are. It could include form tutors, their head of year, a well-being or pastoral team or department or person, or just a teacher that they get on with really well and one who they find really friendly and really like to talk to. So sharing these things with them can be really positive. Now there might be a bit of a change as actually when they're at primary school, you might have been the ones who were kind of dealing with lots of these things and talking to the school. It's actually how can we equip our children to have those conversations for themselves? How can we encourage them, build their confidence that actually when these things come up, when maybe they notice some of these changes or they're feeling a particular way, how can we give them the confidence to go and have those conversations with those key people themselves? And a really good way to do that is just practicing at home, having like a little fake conversation, like a little dry run of it, and just to build that confidence so that when they get there, they might know some of the kind of things they want to say, or maybe what their teacher might ask them, and they can kind of prepare a little bit for those conversations. But I think, yeah, equipping them to be able to deal with those conversations in the moment, actually, when they notice those challenges, being able to go to the right people and find the right support that they need.
And can you also share a little bit, Molly, about what the phase do in secondary school? Now, I know it would take hours to go into detail about everything that we do, but can you give sort of a general oversight about what we do in the Hitchin secondary schools?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we work across the Hitchin secondary schools, and we work in a whole bunch of different capacities. So we are often around at break times and lunchtime. So your children, young people will probably see us in our phase t-shirts around school, which has got quite a big presence there. So being able to be those people they can come and chat to, say hi to, and a little bit of a familiar face. We also offer some support through the schools, kind of in touch with those wellbeing and pastoral departments, whether that's through mentoring or maybe some small group work. And we might also crop up in some of their lessons across Key Stage 3 on a whole bunch of different topics, all from transition to digital well-being to resilience to emotions to lots of these topics that our teenagers are kind of grappling with at the moment. And also our resources online available for anyone. So do go and check them out. We've got a whole bunch of blog posts on there to read, some for young people, some for parents, some for everyone, and also some resources, some activities, YouTube videos, and also some resources on our social media. So lots there to get thinking about.
Thank you, Molly. And then finally, Kieran, I think it's really important to end the podcast thinking about who is actually there to support parents. Obviously, this is a difficult time for children facing a big change and a big challenge, but also for parents supporting their children with that challenge and change is a difficult time for them as well. So, who might be there or what might help parents feel supported?
Yeah, good question. I think first of all, just to remember that we all generally have a support network around us. So access those friends, those family members, maybe those that have been through this before. You know, what did you do? How did you cope with this? Again, it's a big change for the whole family, not just the child that's moving up to secondary school, but the parents as well. Life is changing, and that can be really hard. There's a whole bunch of organisations. There's ourselves, Phase, Grit. There's Angels. A huge amount of organisations out there. Probably the first thing to ask is if you're struggling with something. Google doesn't always have the answers, but actually Googling, you know, what your struggle is and what organisations locally to me are there. Speaking to the school as well. If something's really tough or you'll find something challenging, the school has a whole host of connections and networks and organisations that they can signpost you to. And it's probably that big thing of just be brave. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Everybody needs help. I often say to myself and to others, like, you know, if your friend was feeling like this, what would you say to them? And most people are like, oh, you know, I'd encourage them. I'd help them find something. I'd do something. We're really good at giving other people help and support and not so good at getting it ourselves. So if you're in that position, you know, remind yourself that you would be happy to help somebody else. So just ask is a key part.
I think there was two really powerful parts in there, Kieran. There was one around actually using Google or using the internet, not to look for answers, but to look for support or look for organizations that can support. Because often actually when we Google answers, we'll probably end up with probably more anxiety or more questions than answers. But actually, if we use that to try and find organizations that are local, that are able to get alongside you and support you, actually that will probably be a much better solution than trying to find all the answers just online. And then also that idea of actually just being kind to yourself, like you would be kind to your child and having grace for your child who's going for a big change. Also, you're supporting a child who's going for a big change, and so be kind, be graceful to yourself. And one of my favorite kind of stories or analogies or stats around that is that people's dogs are much more likely to finish a course of antibiotics than they are, because we're much better at looking after something else or someone else than we are ourselves. So just to kind of finish with that idea of be kind to yourself and be graceful to yourself as you look after your child as they go through that change. Molly and Kieran, thank you for your help with today's Q&A. Would you like to say goodbye to our listeners?
Pleasure. Really hope that's helped. But yeah, thanks very much, James.
Yeah, thank you. Best of luck for your summer and September.
Thanks, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Phase podcast. If you did, please consider rating the show or leaving a comment, as it really helps more people discover our podcast. And as always, if you want to make sure you stay up to date with all things Phase, subscribe to this podcast on your favourite platform and follow us on your favourite social media at Phased Hitchin.